The first step to generalizing CPLEX, where we can solve the same problem multiple times with different values, is using data files. Now, before, what we had done is whenever we had created our model file, so our .mod, we did stuff like saying int m equals 5. Maybe we defined a range. So depose equals 1.5. And then maybe we had a C vector over those 5 elements. And we actually put this inside of our optimization where we had maybe a minimization, and again, we could say, we could have some sort of sum, and we had some subject to constraints. And this is fine and good, but the question I think we want to head towards is, what if we want to change these values? Do we need to change our model file? Well, it ends up that CPLEX allows us to sort of put in placeholders instead of defining them in the model file. And what it'll do is it will load the variable values from a data file. And so the idea is you keep your model file the same, but maybe you could provide it a different data file each time you run your model. Okay, so the way we're going to go about doing this is by introducing these placeholders. Now, the way you write a placeholder is instead of writing the value, and actually I have a couple mistakes here. So maybe this should have been 1 to m, right? So instead of writing the values, what we do is we replace it with a ... Okay? And so I'm just going to copy this. So this is kind of what we had before. And I'm going to show you what we're going to transition to. So we're going to have 2 types of files in this case. We're going to have a model file, and we're going to have something, a data file. And the extension on this is a .dat. Right? Well, in this case, the model files are .mod. Okay, so the way we're going to do this, again, is we're going to put ... for a placeholder. So in this case, instead of 5, we would just put ... semicolon. Okay. Now, CPLEX is automatically going to know that whenever it sees ... to look for that value in the data file. So in the data file, what you end up writing is m equals 5. The next thing that we're going to do for this particular one is we're going to set the range. Now in this case, CPLEX doesn't let you define a range or actually load in the range from a data file. You actually have to define the ranges in the model file. So to be clear, this guy changes, and the way it changes is by the placeholder ... Well, with ranges, we have to keep them defined in the model file. And in some ways this makes sense because the range sort of has more to do with the structure of the problem than the actual values that the problem uses. All right. Now, the next thing that we can change is certainly our matrices and vectors. And just like before, we can put in a placeholder where we're going to replace the values here with just ... So if we want to be clear about what's getting changed, it's these green things. Okay. And of course we still have the semicolon. And in our data file, here is where we're going to place the actual value. So in this case, we'll say C is equal to the array. Okay. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so these data files aren't too complicated. But the key points here are, we still have to define the data type whenever we're loading in values from our data file. So define that it's an integer or a variable. And we actually still define how big it is. So this part sort of surprised me. In the data files, though, we can just write in exactly what those values are. And, you know, again, this part's a little bit odd to me, but when we type out the values, when we explicitly write out the values in the data files, we don't actually have to say what type it is. So again, we're not necessarily saying C is floats, right, or integers. So that's how you do it. So after you have your model file and your data file, then you go ahead and just put them in your run configuration, and you should be able to run. Okay, so we're going to do this with the transportation problem we had worked with before. And so what I'm going to do is I just made another sort of LP file or a model file called simple transportation with dat. What you're then going to want to do, so let me delete this so you can sort of see the process. What you're going to want to do is then create a new data file. Okay, so I'm going to call this transportation dat. Transportation data. Okay. So let's do that. Right. And it's going to add the dat to it. So here goes the data file. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy in the original transportation problem that we had. And I'm going to put it in here. All right. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the old, oh, if you haven't done this, remove the old transportation model file and put in your new one with the data. So I call this simple transportation with dat. Go ahead and drag that in. And then what you're also going to want to do is drag in your transportation data.dat file. So we go ahead, drag that in. It's going to ask if we want to add it, and we'll say yes. Okay, so at this stage, we need to start using our data file. So it's empty. And again, what we're going to do is, instead of hard coding an M, we're just going to say dot, dot, dot. Right? And in the data file, we're going to say M equals 4. We can do the same thing with n. So n was equal to 3. And so we'll replace this with dot, dot, dot. Alright. The ranges we have to keep defined in our model file, but we can put C, S, and D into our data file. So at this point, again, we need to just get rid of the data type. And we don't even have to define how big it is. Right? The vectors. We just have to sort of hard code in the values. All right, so here we have our C matrix, we have our S vector, and our D vector. All right, so at this point, I'm going to save that. For C, S, and D, we now want to tell it, CPLEX, to load in from the dat file. So I'll go ahead and put dot, dot, dot here for C, S, and D. And at this point, now what we're doing is we're loading M, N, C, S, and D all from the data file. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save this. And we can run it, and what you should see is that we get the exact same answer as before. And sure enough, we should see that. And here you can see it actually loaded in the correct values of C, D, and S, which is awesome. One thing that I sort of played with is I wanted to make sure, that we actually have to define the ranges here. And so what I'll do is I'm going to show you how we can sort of break this. So let's say we wanted to try to load in the range. So I'm going to go ahead and do this full thing just to show that it, in fact, does not work. So what do we have? Depots and destinations. Okay, so the interesting part is we're not getting errors here, but we're going to get errors here. You see this whole thing lighting up in red. Sometimes they don't clear, so it might be nothing. Maybe it just needs to clear, but if we do run, right, you see it's starting to run. And even here, if you highlight over, you're going to see that it's already sort of popping up an error, and we ended up with 10 errors. Right? The first one, that's sort of the most important, is that it says we can't load in depots and dests from an external data source. And again, the idea was these ranges, they have to be defined in the model file. So even if we did something like this, we can give this a shot, right, where maybe we don't tell it it's a range, we try to trick it. And again, we're still having errors there. So the end point is we can't define ranges in our data files. They have to be set in our model file. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, what's the point of doing this, right? Like, why would I have a .dat file when I could just hard code it into a model file? And there's actually two reasons why you might want to do this. Right? So the simple reason is maybe you wrote some code in Python or C that can automatically generate these data files, right? And so what you can do is you can keep this file the same, but you can keep dragging in new data files here, right? So again, you write some code to create a data file. The other reason why you might want to do this is what we're going to show later on is you can actually use data files to load data from Excel spreadsheets. So that's it for this video. It's a short one, but hopefully it sort of got you sort of set on how we can import data into our models.